as soon as we're done recording this, then I'll tell you guys where you can check it out and see it and everything like that.
Good. Yeah, okay.
So here we are tonight, another episode of Riding Away with Dave, and I've got special guests. I know you always get picked. Actually, this is one of my dream team members right here, Harvey Wasserman. And Harvey, be sure to give everybody all your credentials and your background in the nuclear industry, because we're going to talk a little bit, and we did a real nice film video on your presentation, but let everybody know what they're going to hear in the show tonight.
Well, I'm here to talk, unfortunately, about the disaster at the Japanese reactors. I was in Japan speaking about nuclear power in the mid-1970s, and all the things that have happened at Fukushima and the other reactors in Japan were totally discussed and predicted. It was only a matter of time, and so I've been with the nuclear industry issue against the nuclear industry since 1973. I've written God knows how many books about it. This is my most recent, which portrays a world after nuclear power, which hopefully will be entering sooner now rather than later. Solartopia portrays a totally green-powered Earth, and I'm working with Dave and other people, Bob Tracus and freepress.org, to bring about a green-powered Earth. And right now I am editor of the nukefree.org website, where we post all the latest breaking news on nuclear power.
And also let everybody know, because you're doing a lot of work with the Huffington Post, right? And your post.
Well, they publish my stuff from time to time. Common Dreams, Counterpunch, Alternate has a piece of mine up right now. And so, thank God for the internet. We need to protect the internet. It's the only way we get the word out. And if without it, we would be absolutely nowhere. So that's an essential part of getting to a green-powered solar-topian Earth, is protecting the internet. And I hope you'll make good use of it.
Good. Okay, guys, enjoy the show.
Thank you.
Good job.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, good.
My pleasure.
Yeah.
Good job. Okay, I'm Harvey Wasserman, senior editor of freepress.org, and I also am the editor of nukefree.org, nukefree.org. Now, we are posting all the major articles about the Japanese disaster and what's going on, and it is actually getting worse. As I'm talking to you right now, we've just gotten news that a third reactor may be melting. So the first one was in the process of melting, apparently. Well, quite obviously it was in the process of melting. They had an explosion, and they had to dump seawater into the reactor, which is the last thing the owner of a reactor wants to do. Because seawater will totally corrode it, and the reactor is essentially dead now. There's a second reactor there that seems to be in the process of melting down, and they may dump water in that one, and then now I just got word that there's possibly a third one. You have to understand about Japanese industry. First of all, there's very advanced industry. For all these years, the nuclear power apologists have said that, well, Chernobyl couldn't happen here. Chernobyl was a Russian reactor. They didn't Soviet reactor. They didn't have good technology. It was a different design. These reactors in Japan are General Electric reactors, and General Electric is now owned by a Japanese corporation, as is Westinghouse. And they are as advanced, every bit as advanced as American reactors, and basically the same designs as American reactors. They're operated every bit as well, or as poorly, however you want to put it, as American reactors. So there's no hiding here. And there are 55 reactors in Japan. All of them are on or near earthquake faults. This is not new. I was in Japan in 1975 and 6, and then again in 78. I went around the country speaking about nuclear power. Everybody knew that these reactors were vulnerable to exactly this kind of problem. This is no surprise. There's no mystery here is what's going on. Now the earthquake that caused the tsunami apparently happened about 130 miles offshore, as best we can tell, or as best I've seen. And if this had hit 130 miles off the coast of California, we would be looking at 4 reactors, 2 at San Onofre and 2 at Diablo Canyon, that could also have been ripped apart. There's just no doubt about it. They are both, really all 4 of them are on or near earthquake faults, every bit as powerful as what we've seen in Japan. And in fact, as I'm sure you all know, the tsunami did come to California. 5 people were killed in California by the tidal wave. And actually, there's pictures on the news of a couple of harbors in California that were completely torn apart by the tsunami. What was it, 7,000 miles away? So what we have now, there are about 440, 450 reactors worldwide. Many of them are on earthquake faults. The 4 reactors in California, as I mentioned, are on earthquake faults. There are the Ramapo fault in New York is very near the Indian Point reactor. There's a fault line under the Seabrook plant in New Hampshire, and I'm sure you'll all be happy to know that the only nuclear plant in the United States that's actually been hit by an earthquake is Perry in Ohio, 35 miles east of Cleveland. On January 31st, 1986, an earthquake, a 5.5 Richter scale earthquake, actually did tangible damage to the Perry nuclear plant. Thankfully, it wasn't operating at the time, but I can't imagine trying to operate a nuclear plant in the middle of an earthquake, especially not an 8.9 earthquake like the one that has hit Japan. So there are about, I believe there are 11 reactors that are shut because of this earthquake. What they're not talking about in the news is that there are 5 other reactors that have been shut since 2007 by another earthquake that hit the Kashiwazaki plant where there were 7 reactors. So this is really a major turning point for the whole question of nuclear power. If there's right now pending in Congress as part of the 2012 budget, there's a proposal for $30 billion to fund new nuclear plants with loan guarantees from the taxpayer. And we are going to have to kill that. We've had miraculously been keeping it at bay since 2007 against all odds. There was supposed to be $50 billion in 2007 under Bush, and then Obama came in and people thought, well, maybe it won't come up again. Of course, he proposes $36 billion actually is what it is. And we have just by hook or crook kept it out of the past budgets. It's not in the 2011 budget, but they want to put it in the 2012 budget. So that is something we can tangibly do. And we now have movements all over the country, especially in Vermont and elsewhere, to shut operating reactors. The first Fukushima reactor that had this meltdown is actually 40 years old. It was opened in 1971. And some of the other units in Japan are pretty old. But Vermont Yankee's not quite that old. And we're trying, Monticello actually is in Minnesota. Davis-Besse is from the early 70s. We'd love to get Davis-Besse shut. There's this myth that there's no earthquake fault in the Midwest. In fact, it may be the most powerful earthquake in the Midwest, in the country, is the New Madrid fault that comes up from up the Mississippi and then turns right and goes up into northern Ohio. We have had slight tremors in Columbus, nothing major, but where Perry and Davis-Besse are, especially Perry, they are vulnerable to earthquake, as are the 11 or so reactors that are around Chicago. So this is not a surprise. It's it's not something that people didn't know about. It's not something that people haven't been debating for 40 years. It just took this long to happen, and where it will go is impossible to know at this point in time. We know that there have been radiation releases. We know there was an explosion. Now, the industry tried to say that the explosion was ancillary to the what was going on in the reactor, but that's not credible. They wouldn't have had an explosion if there wasn't something that came out of the reactor, probably hydrogen gas, and that must have compromised the containment inside. There's no way to have an explosion on a surrounding building and not do some damage to the containment, and certainly to the control room, and certainly to the spent fuel, which is parked at all these reactors. And certainly, you have an explosion, I can't imagine who's going to be operating the nuclear plant in the middle of an explosion.
Yeah.
So these things are all very, very bad. We do know now that the radiation from Chernobyl went all around the world. Came here, well, it came to northern Ohio. Actually didn't come into central Ohio. It went across northern Ohio, all the way across.
Grandview had cesium ratings that went up on the scale. Personally, I was there myself and saw the data.
Okay. Well, most of the maps show the wind patterns from Chernobyl going across the northern tier of the United States. But radiation from Chernobyl reached California without a doubt within 10 days of the accident. there's no doubt about this, was measured at Point Reyes, came down in a rainstorm, and then went across the northern tier of the United States, and then came around again. We don't know how much radiation will be released ultimately from Japan, but it will not be negligible, that's for sure. And like I say, the 4 reactors in California, we could very easily be standing here talking about them if this tsunami earthquake had hit, you know, in the other side of the Pacific instead of on the Japan side. So you know, that's what we're looking at here. They've expanded the evacuation zone around Fukushima to 20-mile radius, which is very large, much larger than they did at 3 Mile Island.
What's the population around it?
That's very high. I don't know actually.
180,000.
Yeah. Well, but you know, how far away we don't know. Where people live, it's only 200 miles from Tokyo. It's not that far from Tokyo. It's very a nuclear plant is very capable of emitting a radioactive cloud sufficient to go 200 miles and do very serious damage. This is a very different situation from Chernobyl in terms of population because Chernobyl was in a remote rural area. Kiev, the biggest city, was 80 miles away. Nothing in Japan is remote because you know Japan is what 130 million people or more living on a land size the size of California, and much of Japan is uninhabitable. Everybody lives down near the coast, and so there's no uninhabited areas down along the coast of California. I'm sorry, of Japan. Although it's where San Onofre and Diablo Canyon is also has been built up. Let's put it that way. So we were looking at a terrible situation. Plus, you know, what didn't happen at Chernobyl is that you didn't have a whole other catastrophe going on. I can't imagine the Japanese government trying to come up with the resources to deal with this, given what else has happened. I'm sure you've all seen the pictures. I mean, there's an entire town where 10,000 people are missing. So this is really beyond bad, and there's just no way to describe what could happen here, and we are in the middle of it. You know, it's only a few hours ago that they flooded the first unit at Fukushima. They're probably in the process of figuring out how to flood the second one, and they may have to do a third one, which is not good. It means that radiation has already escaped, and that probably the containment has been compromised. And by the way, even if the containment is not compromised, all these plants have stacks. And there's no way that the stacks survived. The containment was not apparently compromised at 3 Mile Island, but radiation did escape through the stacks. And there's no way to contain it entirely. So we won't know for years, really, the full extent of the damage, but we are definitely not yet out of the woods. Yes.
Harvey, was the biggest amount of damage done from the actual earthquake itself, or was it from the tsunami, or them losing power? Or run us through this scenario exactly.
Okay. I haven't heard that the tsunami ran into these plants, but it's possible. And it would also be possible at Diablo Canyon and San Onofre. I believe San Onofre is about 30 feet above sea level, which ain't much. And Diablo Canyon is much more.
San Onofre is right on the beach.
Yeah, it is, but they have San Onofre has a wall that's apparently 30 feet high. I was arrested at Diablo Canyon. I don't remember how far up we were, but not very far. Certainly capable of being reached by a tsunami. And the big problem with a tsunami reaching these plants, aside from compromising the reactor, is that you have spent fuel there. Now, you know, the geniuses of design nuclear power plants, if there's an accident at a nuclear power plant and the plant has to shut down, they still need power. They have to have electrical power to power the pumps, or else the spent fuel pools will melt, and what's left in the reactor will melt. Because what happened they did shut down the first reactor at Fukushima, but they couldn't get it down entirely. And you have residual heat that has to be cooled. And so you shut down your chief power source. You're then reliant on backup generators, which I'm sure were hammered, and then batteries. Hillary Clinton said yesterday we were flying in coolant water. She was wrong. We were flying in batteries or backup generators. If you fly in backup generators, you also have to fly in gasoline or something, whatever fuel they use, probably kerosene. So this is, you know, a multiple maze here that no one's able to negotiate at this point in time. But like I said, they have 11 reactors. We know as many as 5 were severely compromised, and now they're admitting to being on the brink. They've dumped seawater into one, they may be on the brink of doing it on the second one, and now there's a third one. And there were two others that may not be under control either. So this is something you could make a bad science fiction movie about.
What's happening to the workers there that are being asked to go in and put this seawater in? Or, I mean,
well,
a lot of people at Chernobyl died.
You would hope that they have life insurance because, you know, we have this experience from Chernobyl. At Chernobyl, they ran over 800,000 people through the reactor. When I first saw that, I thought it was a typo. But they ran 800,000 people through the reactor at Chernobyl. And there's no doubt they've been dying in droves. I spoke in Kaliningrad in 1996, 10 years after the accident, and I spoke to a group of these guys. They're called liquidators. And they just said, you know, most of them were only in there 60 to 90 seconds. In fact, the Soviet Union gave them huge benefits if they would go up there and run in. And a lot of them did, and they're dying. I wouldn't bet on the longevity of any Japanese nuclear plant reactor, but any of these reactors now. It's just, the radiation is devastating. Now, of course, we're not getting a complete story from the American media. You know, the corporations are downplaying it. The Wall Street Journal has been downplaying it. Fox News will probably be running stories about how the radiation is good for everybody. But, you know, the alternative media has been all over it. It's been in, you know, freepress.org and nukefree.org. Thankfully, we have the internet, at least for the next couple of days until the Republicans get done with it. So that's where it's at. Anybody want to ask me questions?
Harvey, why did they have to vent pressure out to the atmosphere?
It's because the pressure vessel, think of an eggshell, okay, and then which is shaped like the pressure vessel, and it's here, and it's only got a design rating of so great, and then it will blow up. It will shatter.
Is that the containment vessel?
That's the containment. I'm sorry, the pressure vessel is the core, and that's another thing I'll talk about. The containment is the dome, okay? And the domes are rated, you know, they're very strong allegedly, but they're rated for how much they can handle. If the internal pressure gets too high, they have to vent, and it is radioactive. I mean, I saw one story referred to it as air. So they're venting air. I mean, come on. You know, these are radioactive gases, and the serious problem is hydrogen, which we had an issue with at 3 Mile Island. If hydrogen accumulates inside the pressure vessel, inside the core, or the containment, if you get a spark and it ignites, hydrogen is extremely explosive. I mean, everybody was paranoid during 3 Mile Island about a hydrogen explosion. They maybe have had a hydrogen explosion at Fukushima, we're not sure. Yeah.
They said on the radio when they were adding waters, the explosion that occurred recently was caused by hydrogen.
Well, that would make sense because, and that's another downside. It sounds nice and simple to pour in a whole lot of seawater, but if it's still super hot, you're gonna separate the hydrogen from the oxygen, and if the oxygen is there, well, it can explode very, very powerfully. The other problem, one of the other problems, is that these are old reactors, and there are issues with old reactors in terms of what's called embrittlement. 41 years of sitting there being pounded by super hot liquid, which is radioactive, will lead to metals becoming embrittled. And the concern about embrittled metals is if you then hit them, if they're super hot and then you hit them with a dose of cold water, they could turn to powder, basically. They will shatter. And we had that issue with a nuclear plant here in Massachusetts, and we actually prevented it from reopening based on that issue. So these reactors, the old ones, are going to be very prone to embrittlement and possibly shattering with this, you know, nice simple prospect of dumping in salt water. So, you know, this is as bad as it gets, basically. Well, maybe not. But it's
well, Harvey, wouldn't these plants have to be built with some kind of what-if scenario? I mean, don't they have things built in, or what's their fail-safe type of
well, their fail-safe failed, basically, and will continue to fail. This is a technology that's not meant for use on this planet. It is simply, that's why we've been doing this. I've been fighting these plants since 1973. I mean, that's why we've been fighting them. It is not an appropriate technology for planet Earth. You know, maybe it'll work on Jupiter or Saturn or some other galaxy, but certainly not on this Earth. It is, you know, it is, well, we're seeing all this tonight. And none of this is a surprise. This has all been discussed. Every one of these scenarios that's occurring at these plants, we knew about. There's no mystery here. The industry just said, oh, it won't happen. Yeah.
Harvey, can you bring us up to speed on the current plans for building new nuclear facilities on the Scioto River and for bringing nuclear waste from all over the country to support nuclear operations all over the country by taking it away from the private corporations and putting it on federal land on the Scioto River?
Well, we all know that John Kasich would never allow such a thing to happen. I mean, yeah, I mean, there has been talk of putting a nuclear plant in southern Ohio. Now, I have to tell you that the other dimension to this fight is economic. These plants are completely off scale in terms of private investment. No one is going to invest in these plants with private money. That's why the big fight has been in Congress. The Japanese plants are, you know, a very heavy mix of government funding with, you know, a small percentage of private funding. In France, everybody, I love how all these right-wingers talk about the French nuclear industry. It's national socialism. All the French reactors are owned by the government. And it's not like a democratic socialism where everybody has a say. The French government owns, operates, regulates, and monitors the nuclear plants in France. And so, you know, you hear these guys saying, oh, they get 80% of their electricity from nuclear power, and then they turn around and talk about a free market. I mean, the French put, you know, Riva is a government company. They get a small amount of private capital to make it look good, and it's all national socialism. And so that's what they're proposing here, is to build new plants with federal money, loan guarantees. I think after this it will not happen. We had a pretty tough fight. As I said, we've been winning amazing victories against all odds, beginning in 2007 when they came back at us. They did get $18.5 billion from Bush. They came back for 50, and we stopped them in 2007. We've been, by hook or crook, stopping them till now. It was not in the 2011 budget. It is in the 2012 budget, and now we're going to have to get it out. I don't think, I know there are proposals to build a nuclear plant in Ohio. You know, I'd say the odds are very, as Dizzy Dean used to say, slim to none, but we're really going to have to fight it. It's not going to happen automatically. I mean, one minor problem is there's not enough cooling water down there. You know, small detail. I know it's going to come as a shock to a lot of people in Ohio, but there's no ocean where Kentucky is. And cooling these things on a river is just, you know, very, very chancy at this point in time.
Well, Erie is still, you know, those are big up.
Well, Lake Erie, yes, but, you know, if you want to look at, and I'm telling you, we have dodged a major bullet at Davis-Besse. It's remarkable that that plant hasn't melted. It's very, very poorly run. They've had, you know, they had boric acid leak on the reactor pressure vessel. You couldn't make that up. If someone said, oh, you know, better watch the boric acid leaking on the pressure vessel, they'd have laughed you out of town. And they did it, and it got within, like, literally that far away from a meltdown at Davis-Besse. And then the company went in and they cut a hole in the containment and put another pressure vessel in there. I mean, this is just, these people are completely irresponsible. There's no excuse for what's happening in Japan. I mean, I say, I was there, I've been following the industry since the 70s. Everything that's happening at Fukushima and these other reactors was discussed. So it was debated.
Now,
and the industry said, no, we can handle it.
What was new to me is that you said, and I'm not sure, did you say the majority, or let's say many of them are built close or either on faults? I mean,
all the reactors in Japan.
No.
All of them. Well, there's nowhere in Japan that's not.
Well, why would, I mean, what is the reasoning for that?
No,
but it's not just Japan. We have also in the States.
Well, not all reactors in the United States are quite built on faults, but there are some surprises. I mean, I was shocked when Perry was hit by an earthquake. I mean, I grew up with it. Who ever thought about earthquakes in Ohio? But it turns out the New Madrid Fault, which goes pretty much up the Mississippi, very, very powerful, does cut right and go up to Lake Erie. And, you know, so there you go.
There's no place on Earth really that's totally free from earthquake.
Right, and there are those who argue, by the way, that, you know, this 8.9, it's a big deal. That it may make big earthquakes more frequent because it's shaking things up. They've been having aftershocks that are 6 and 7 on the Richter scale which are notable on their own. And apparently there was a separate,
Before shots.
yes, and there was a separate earthquake that may not have been related to this one, which was in the 6 or 7 range. And you have to remember the Richter scale is logarithmic. It's not you know, exponential rather, yes. And so every jump up is order of magnitude.
10
So,
times.
yeah, so the 5 point, is it 10 or 100?
10.
It's 10. So the 5.5 that we got at Perry, which did do damage to the plant, is what, 1,000 times weaker than the one that just hit Fukushima. And yet the one at Perry did do damage. So, you know, having been at this so long, you know, there's nothing here we're seeing that wasn't predicted. But what's shocking is that they were able to build these plants and they continue to operate them. Now there will be, you know, we are going to, I think we'll be able to stop now this $36 billion. I hope so. You know, we may need some help from Obama.
So when you say we, you're trying to stop the nuclear plants nationwide, not just in
Yes,
Ohio.
yes. Well, the only way new nuclear plants can be built is if the government finances them. And there is no private money to build new nuclear plants. Not going to happen. What they did in Georgia is, and they won't be able to do here, at least unless they change the law, is in Georgia they're making the ratepayers pay for there's 2 plants being built there. Obama went down there and gave them $8.33 billion in loan guarantees. But they're forcing the ratepayers to pay for the plants as they're being built. Which is, so that even if they never go online, the ratepayers have to pay. And they're going to do that in South Carolina too. Outside of these 2 states, I don't know where they're going to go now. But we have to keep pressure on it. You will hear in a month or 2, hopefully when this is all done, you will hear people saying, you know, George Will and all these other guys that come out, and they're going to look very erudite with their bow ties and all that stuff. And they're going to say, oh, well, it was nowhere near as bad, it was contained, and we won't have that here, and all that. They will. You will hear it. And the radiation is good for you. There's no indication. They said that.
And we learn from our
You
mistakes.
get to glow in the dark.
They said that at Chernobyl.
That's right.
I just now,
What's that?
10 minutes ago, I read a response to an LA Times article written an hour ago that said this is the fault of the enviro lemmings who have prevented progress from being made in building technologically more sound things. That the Japanese thing is 40 years old, and we're responsible for the halt in the technological development to make these things safe.
Right.
That's going to be the
Well, the
argument.
same thing is true of the BP oil catastrophe.
Look at your car. It
It
can
was the
now park without
environmental's
us.
fault.
You don't even need.
Right. So, yeah, I mean, you'll hear everything.
Yeah.
You will hear everything, but this is apocalyptic. This is, and there's no, you know, even with Chernobyl, I knew enough. A lot of people, anybody who knew about nuclear power at all knew what Chernobyl was, but it was far away, and it was not on the immediate TV. In fact, the Soviets didn't tell anybody. We only found out about Chernobyl. We only found out about Chernobyl because you can pick this up. Guys in Sweden who were going to work at the nuclear plant started registering with high radiation on their clothing. And they immediately thought the reactor there was melting down. They couldn't figure out what was happening. And they finally put 2 and 2 together, and they realized 1,000 miles away, this nuclear plant has melted down. The Soviets said nothing. If they hadn't found out in Sweden, we still wouldn't know about Chernobyl. And you know, it wasn't until much later that we got any detail. There's still arguing. There's still people who say that virtually nobody was killed at Chernobyl. There's still, at 3 Mile Island, I mean, I'm sorry to say this, I was the only reporter that went into 3 Mile Island a year afterwards. And I spent a week, 10 days there, and I interviewed dozens of people. I'm the only reporter that went there and actually interviewed people. Except there were a couple of filmmakers made a movie called Voices of 3 Mile Island, which you do not want to see. I mean, it is so devastating to talk with these people. And they still deny that anybody was killed at 3 Mile Island. I talked to people who were dying in front of my eyes at 3 Mile Island. And you know, the denial machine is huge. They're going to have a problem with this. I mean, this was immediately covered. And they can spin it all they want, but you know, I was stunned to see on TV the visuals of the plant exploding. You know that is staggering, and there's no way around that. Really, that's a hard one. And as I say, this is Japan. Japan's reactors are every bit as advanced as every reactor in the United States. they're ahead of us in many ways. So yes.
I'll just say, we were talking about Arriva. There was just an article, I think Bob Alvarez wrote it. It says Arriva, it has a new strategic partner. It's the American taxpayer.
Yes, exactly.
Because we are, they're getting handouts like crazy from the American government, this French nuclear company, and they're really big and they're really promoting it. And there's a lot of research. I don't know exactly what Battelle is doing, but Battelle has its hand out there for government money in every kind of nuclear research, and it's happening right here in Columbus.
Right. Well, Arriva is the front corporation that's been set up by the French government to make it appear that there is a private corporation that's doing nuclear power around the world, but it's a public corporation. I mean, it's owned by the French government, basically. And they get a small amount of corporate money just to make it look like, it's private enterprise, but it's not. I've actually been in their headquarters. And the chief, they're headed by a woman, Anne Lauvergeon, who's quite a piece of work. And she was down when they were talking about doing the nuclear plant in the southern Ohio. We actually got in there because of my free press press credentials. And I went up and the Ohio media didn't have any idea this was one of the most powerful people in the world. And I went up and started to talk to her and asked her some questions she really didn't want to hear. We put it on video, actually. Deb video did. And if she had known I'd been from Greenpeace, she would probably have pulled out a revolver and shot me. That's the way it is. So, but we can't let up now. This is what has to happen. But this is the moment to shut these people down. The other thing that's happened, and since we're going into depth on this, what has happened now, what's changed radically in the world, even just in the last year or two, is that the renewable industry, and especially photovoltaic cells, solar cells, that generate electricity with sunlight, they have turned the corner. And it is now 100% legitimate to say that if you had $10 billion to spend on generating new electricity, even in the north, you would do better to spend it on photovoltaics than on a nuclear plant. The economics have now finally turned in our direction. And it's because the nuclear plants have been going up, constantly going. There's no learning curve here. There's a reverse learning curve with nuclear power. And it's just been going up in price. To the extent, about 3 years ago, they proposed, one of the few where they came up with a price tag, they proposed 2 reactors in South Florida, and they estimated $2 to $3 billion each. They're now estimating $11 billion each. This is in only 3 years without turning the first shovel. I mean, this is going to put them just so far beyond. Because of all the precautions now they're going to have to build in, even to think about building a new plant, especially near the ocean. So, I mean, we do have hurricanes in Florida. And in fact, a hurricane did pass over the Turkey Point plant in '91. Hurricane Andrew went right over the thing, and it actually did $100 million worth of damage. And they lost offsite power, which is what's happening. And they were able to get it back quickly enough, but obviously they haven't in Japan. So this is very, very bad. We don't know what's going to happen in Japan. We don't, and I feel terribly for the people there to have this on top of a tsunami, and you've all seen the pictures. But this really is the end. We really have to bury this industry now forever, and I think we can do it. Frankly, we were close anyway. By the way, I mean we're giving them a run for their money, even for this $36 billion, even with Obama supporting them. We had a shot at stopping it, but now we have no choice, and we have to first pray that this accident doesn't go any further, and second, that once it is done, that we can finish off this industry once and for all.
Harvey, why don't you let everybody know who the coalition is that's going to be the ones to stop the nuclear power plants, and who the leading proponents are of that, and how everybody can get more information.
It's evolved over the years, although I must say there's about 2 or 3 dozen of us who've been doing it from the very beginning. We're sort of the almost in our walkers and wheelchair brigade. And, I've been doing this since '73, so that's 38 years, God. And so there are groups in Washington, NEARS.org, Beyond Nuclear, Ralph Nader's organizations, Helen Caldicott is still on the case. I work with Bonnie Ray Jackson Brown and Graham Nash, and we have a website, nukefree.org, where I post articles. But we have also been in coalition with the National Taxpayers Union. There are a lot of conservative groups, including the Heritage Foundation, by the way. the Heritage Foundation is very interesting, and Cato, they both slam renewables all the time, but then they turn around and they also slam nuclear because it's government subsidized. So the free market conservatives who are consistent are on our side, actually. And so, you know, we had some support from some Tea Party people and some support from, some opposition from one Tea Party guy who said, well, there's too much regulation. And that brings up another issue, which is the biggest issue. Maybe I should really throw it open here, but insurance. In 1957, when the Atomic Energy Commission was the really big pusher for commercial reactors, because they were building atomic bombs, and they had a two-part agenda. The first part agenda was to have a happy face that they could paint on the bombs, so that they say, oh, we're not just building bombs, we're going to power all of humanity. And the second thing was they were bureaucracy and they were looking for other things to do. So the Atomic Energy Commission went to Dwight Eisenhower and said, look, we want to push atomic power. And he gave a speech in front of the United Nations for the peaceful atom. And one thing led to another, but then when they got to the point of having nuclear power plants to develop, and they went to the utilities says, we're not touching this technology. None of the utilities would do it. So they went to the Congress, and in 1957, Congress passed what's called the Price-Anderson Act. The Price-Anderson Act limits the liability on a major disaster. At the time, it was $540 million. Now it's, I think, $12.3 billion, something like that. But over that amount, so they have that much private insurance, but over that amount, the taxpayer and the victims are liable. And if you, those of you who own a home, look at your homeowner's policy. There is specific exclusion in all homeowners' policies in the entire United States that says if your home is wiped out by, we'll cover you for fire, we'll cover you for flood, we'll cover you for vandalism. If your home is wiped out by a meltdown from a nuclear plant, see you later. You have no coverage. And it is limited by the federal government. So if I'm a corporation, God forbid, if you're a corporation and you build a nuclear plant and it melts down and does $1 trillion or $2 trillion worth of damage, which is a low estimate these days, you are not liable for more than $12.4 billion, which is a drop in the bucket. A nuclear plant could do that much damage in 10 minutes, and as we'll see from Japan. So,
say something about the license extensions that are going on.
Well, we hope that's going to come to an end. All these old reactors, Davis-Besse is since the 70s. Perry opened in '87. They were only licensed for 20 or 30 years, and now the owners are going in front of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and asking for another 20 or 30 years. And I mentioned embrittlement.
So they can't argue about safety.
There are all sorts of things you can't argue about. As we know from the criminal law, the key to winning a criminal case is excluding evidence. And so when you go in front of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, there's a whole laundry list of stuff you can't mention.
The Atomic Safety and Licensing Board denies you from talking about safety.
Yes, right. That makes sense.
Good sense.
Yeah, and you can't talk about evacuation. Well, actually, evacuation did become an issue after 3 rounds. It's one of the issues you can debate. But we had that issue in Ohio after the Perry plant was hit by an earthquake. That our last communist governor, Richard Celeste, dared to have a panel, which was headed by the head of the State Patrol, look into the realities of evacuating Perry, and they came back and said, you can't do it. This is not possible to evacuate here. And then they took that to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and they said, well, that's okay, and they licensed the plant anyway. They licensed the Perry plant after it had been hit by an earthquake. And they actually refused to wait until the study was done on evacuation. They just went ahead and licensed it anyway. So, this is an industry that defies all logic. The only reason it's continuing is because there's enormous amounts of money behind it. And really, in a lot of ways, it's just been a scam. The scam of the nuclear power industry has been to use a little bit of private money and to hire or rent as many legislators as they can and then get federal money to continue building reactors. That's the whole deal. It's like a Ponzi scheme with a very, very large reactor at the end of it. And so, this we have to use to stop them. But first, and there's really nothing we can do about what's happening in Japan. The only thing we can do is just pray And you know, and it's not, as was mentioned, you know, you can say, as I'm sure much of the major media, corporate media is saying, okay, well, they dumped in seawater. Well, you know, first of all, the seawater is going to eat all that stuff. It will eat the zirconium and the other metals in there. It will generate hydrogen. We don't know what's going to, they're going to have to vent the hydrogen and pray it doesn't explode, which maybe it already has at one reactor. And so all we can do is perceive that situation with bated breath, and then hopefully when it's done, and we won't know for years what really happened there. We did not know for 9 years what happened at 3 Mile Island. In the middle of the 3 Mile Island accident, first they denied there was any radiation release, and we knew that to be false. And then they denied the need to evacuate, and then they had to evacuate, but not anywhere near what they should have done. And then all through the time they said there was no melting of fuel. They said no fuel melted, it was other problems, and it's all taken care of. So 9 years later, they invented a robotic camera, and they sent it in there, and they found at least 30% and maybe more of the fuel did melt. And the question ceased being, why did 3 Mile Island happen, and became, why didn't it blow up? And we still don't have a good answer for that. There was a hydrogen bubble in there. We're not exactly sure. We may have been this far away. If that hydrogen bubble had exploded, Philadelphia and New York City would have been irradiated in a very big way.
I was living in Philadelphia at the time.
Well, radiation did get there. And I hope you didn't drink the milk, because the milk from Pennsylvania was heavily irradiated for a long time. And Hershey, the chocolate company, you know, had a serious problem. So, anyway, are there more questions? My next comedy routine will be...
Good job. Good job, Harvey.
Thank you very much.
Hey, I'll go just shoot some,
Oh no,
a little bit. Hold on, let's just shoot a little bit of video out here before it starts.